reiterate that we are concerned that the level of productivity in the public service and throughout Grenada needs to be improved. We want to see people coming to work on a timely basis and be able to perform their duties at a higher level. Sometimes we have too many complaints about people's attitude, people way of conducting business. It doesn't reflect well sometimes on the government and to the people that we serve here in Grenada. So I'm making an appeal to all our workers, whether you are in the central government, statutory bodies, and state-owned enterprise. We want you to basically up your game and make sure you provide the state of Grenada with value for money for the services that you are rendering out there. A smile when your customers come to you go a long way. Talking to them nicely goes a long way. When you come to work and you bring your problems from home to the workplace, it doesn't help that situation. So we are therefore asking people to up the game and be more productive. I'll end here for the moment.
Thank you, Minister Cornwall. At this time, I'd like to turn over to Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ms. Siobhan Britton. I'm not sure if you have anything to add to the Minister's presentation.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Minister did a pretty good job at explaining everything. I just wanted to clarify that it's 25% of your monthly salary. It's the token that government is giving, and 25% of your basic salary. So it doesn't include any acting allowance or traveling allowance or anything like that. It's your basic monthly salary. That's the only clarification I needed to add.
Okay. Thank you, Siobhan. This time, Senator, the Honorable Claudette Joseph, please make your presentation. I know you have a lot to say about the new minimum wage, which will take order come January 1st, 2024.
Thank you very much, Ms. Etienne, and good morning to my colleague Minister, Deputy Permanent Secretary, members of the media present in person with us, and those who are joining us online, also to viewers and listeners across all platforms. I am pleased to join with my colleague this morning in this press conference, and particularly pleased to speak to the new minimum wages order that will come into effect on 1st January 2024. And that will see, for the first time in 12 years, new minimum wages applied in Grenada across the board. We have done quite some extensive consultations starting in April of this year and continuing with the last one in early November. So I think by now, the majority of our listeners and our population will know from the public education that we engaged in around minimum wage that the law requires minimum wages to be reviewed every 3 years. But the last review we had was in 2011. So it has been 12 years since the minimum wages were reviewed and adjusted in Grenada. So we are particularly proud of this achievement. And before I go further, let me extend heartfelt thanks to the members of the Wages Advisory Committee, chaired by Dr. Curlin Gilchrist. They work intensely and consistently and diligently in the last 8 months in order that we might have these new minimum wages coming into effect on January 1st. So in the new order that will take effect, we will see minimum wages increased across the board, across all sectors that are currently in the legislation, and there will be some new sectors added that were never before treated with under the minimum wages order. And I will stick in here right away that the media workers are now covered by the minimum wages order. So in some instances, we have 100% increase. Some instances, it's less. And in other instances, we have increases that reflect really what the market conditions are now, bearing in mind that these wages were adjusted 12 years ago. So some sectors have moved on and have left the minimum wages order behind. So for example, the going rate, the minimum at which a bus conductor, you would find a bus conductor working now, is around $60, $60 to $65. That's the market. That's what the market is demanding now. But in the current legislation, it's still at 35. So what we have done, in keeping with the rate of inflation and what the market is demanding, in some instances, the minimum wages are going to be adjusted in line with what the market is currently saying. So I will just speak to the various sectors. So we have industrial workers. All of them will have the minimum wages included, and these industrial workers include machine operators, cutters, and mechanics and cleaners. So we have $100 a day for mechanics, $85 a day for cutters, machine operators $70 a day, and cleaners $60 a day. So that's the minimum you will be paid or entitled to be paid. Clerical workers, so these are store assistants, administrative clerks, cashiers, receptionists, and so minimum wage $1,200 a month. You will see some rates are quoted by the day, some by the month, and some by the hour. And that reflects how the industry operates and how the industry compensates its workers, how the particular sector traditionally compensate its workers. So also security guards, currently it's $8 per hour. It's going to be up to $9.25. Domestic workers, currently it's $35 a day. It's going to go up to $60 a day. Sanitation workers, I will come back to sanitation workers. Caregivers, people who take care of the elderly, including the elderly who live in homes for the aged. This will see a 100% increase from $700 to $1,400 a month. Workers in bakeries and similar establishments, they normally get paid per week. So payment for ovenmen and bakers, that will increase from $240 to $375 per week. Pastrymen and women from $240 to $350 a week. Wrappers and packers from $170 to $300 a week. And those who are paid by the agricultural workers, for example, they currently work at $6.50 per hour. Their minimum wage will now be $60 a day. And construction workers, all the categories will be increased. Carpenters, masons, painters, plumbers, electricians, steel benders, and new categories that were not in the minimum wages order before, laborers and helpers, very important people on the site. their minimum wage would be $60 and $65 a day, respectively. Then persons in the transportation sectors, drivers, heavy vehicle drivers, those weighing under 5 tons, those weighing more than 20 tons. They have $80 a day, $100 a day, $110 a day, respectively. Bus drivers and conductors, as I said, these are now aligned with what the market pays, from $35 to $60 for bus conductors, and from $60 to $80 for drivers. And then we have helpers, we have media workers who were not previously in the order, $375 a week for reporters and announcers. The other categories that were not previously in the minimum wages order are early childhood workers, $1,200 a month, and sanitation workers. Now, there's a uniqueness about sanitation workers. The research and the work of the committee shows that sanitation workers, we have a shortage of sanitation workers in Grenada. The rate currently is in the region minimum of about $65 a day. And so after doing the relevant research and conducting the consultations with stakeholders, employers and employees alike, the committee recommends a minimum wage of $108 a day for sanitation workers. So that's a substantial increase to this new category. Also, new in the minimum wages order will be call center workers. And the recommendation, or the new rate coming in for call center workers, will be $8.50 a day. The other thing I would like to highlight is that previously, the minimum wages will be adjusted, or was adjusted, based on gender. So, for example, in the agricultural sector, female workers worked for less than their male counterparts. In also several of the sectors, especially the hospitality sector, persons working in the outer parishes and Carriacou and Petite Martinique were paid less than those working in, say, St. George and St. David. We have equalized the wages across parishes and across gender. And so we know going forward we have greater equity in the way our workers are remunerated for their services. So we look forward to employers cooperating and implementing the minimum wages come 1st January 2024. These consultations have been ongoing for a long time, and these new wages will come at no surprise to all of the sectors, the employers in all of the sectors. So we expect, as promised during the consultative process, full cooperation and implementation of these new minimum wages. The law requires that employers post on their premises in a conspicuous spot the minimum wages for the particular sector. And so we will, at the Ministry of Labor, be enhancing our inspectorate arm of the work. So we will seek to ensure that employers comply in all respects with the minimum wages order. And we also encourage workers to know your right, know what your minimum wages in your particular sector, so that if you are paid beneath the minimum wage, you can promptly report same to the Ministry of Labor. But I'm sure we would have very little issues because all sectors were consulted in both rounds of consultations. All sectors were captured. The good thing about these new minimum wages is that they're implemented with the general consensus and consent of employers and employees who agree on what the fair wage would be in the particular sector. Employees, we have these new wages were long in coming. It was a long wait you had. We tried our best to do thorough work, but not to cause further undue delay in bringing new minimum wages to you workers. And in that regard, we expect you to give a fair day's work for a fair day's pay. We expect you to do right by your employers and to give good work for the improved pay you will be receiving. Now, most people will be, and many are already receiving above these rates. I want to emphasize that these are minimum wages. So it is a rate below which the employer cannot pay the employee. If the employer pays below this rate, he will be in breach of the law. That does not mean that the employer is to pay merely the minimum wage. People are to be compensated based on their qualification, experience, and competence. So minimum wages will generally, it's a general principle, will generally apply to perhaps entry-level people or people who are not suitably qualified, but mainly entry-level people. So we do not expect people who deserve higher wages to be paid the minimum wage. And I want to emphasize that to employers. It doesn't mean that this is what you pay a person who is deserving and qualified for higher salary. It just means it is the minimum. It does not mean the salary. So I think I will stop here for the moment, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have, whether in the room with us or online. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Before we ask questions, before I take questions from members of the media, I just had one question. Can you inform the public where they can get more information about the minimum wage, the law, and the workers who fall under that, the categories that you mentioned this morning?
Okay, so the new order, let me tell you where you can find what exists now. The laws of Grenada are available to everyone online at laws.gov.gd, laws.gov.gd. All the laws of Grenada up to 2022 are online at that site. If you want to look for the minimum wages order, you look for under the section that says SRNO, and it is a 2011 SRNO. The actual number escaping me now, but it's a 2011 SRNO. So if you look for the section that says SRNO and you look under 2011, you will see the minimum wages order there, and that is what obtains now. The new minimum wages order will be published in the Gazette in the next 2 or so weeks before the year is ended. It will be published in the Gazette and made available to the public. Apart from posting it at the official website, it would be in the Government Gazette. And as a ministry, the Ministry of Labour will endeavour to circulate the new order and the new rates as far and wide as possible. So we will definitely be sending it to the media and circulating it on our various platforms, including the ministry's social media pages. So it will be widely circulated so that everyone will be
Have access.
acquainted with it. Mhm.
Thank you so much, Senator. At this time, I'd like to invite members of the media in the room and virtually. If you have questions, if you have any questions, you may pose them at this time.
Sherry and Noel, GIS. My question is for Senator Joseph. You mentioned about the new minimum wage order and the fact that employers has to publish
Yeah.
in a place that is visible to all. In terms of penalties, what are the penalties for employers who, for some reason, may not follow the new minimum wage order?
Right. So the Employment Act speaks to penalties for failure to comply with the minimum wages order, and they are financial penalties ranging from, I think it's 10,000 on summary conviction, right? On conviction, it ranges from 10,000 and up. So there are monetary penalties for employers who do not comply with the minimum wages order. Let me just pull up the actual figure here. So Section 53 speaks to posting of the notice at the establishment. Section 54, let me put it up here, speaks to the penalties for non-compliance with the minimum wages order. Section 54. Right. So let me just go through the section. Where an employer, it says at Section 54 of the current Act, where an employer pays less than the rate of wages prescribed in the minimum wage order, the employer commits an offense and shall be liable on conviction to a fine for the first offense not exceeding $5,000. So you do it the first time, you're liable on conviction to pay a fine of $5,000. And then if you do it again, you are liable on conviction to pay a fine of $10,000, as I said earlier, right? And then it goes on to say that where it is found that an employer has paid less than the rate of the wages prescribed in the minimum wages order, the court shall order the employer to pay to the employee or to the employees the difference between the amount which should have been paid and the amount that was in fact paid, together with interest on that amount where appropriate. So the employee will be entitled to interest, and interest is normally at the statutory rate of 6%. So interest on the sum that was unlawfully withheld by the employer, right? And then it goes on to say, where it is alleged. So if an employee alleges that an employer has paid him or her less than the minimum wage, the burden is on the employer to prove otherwise. So the law puts the burden on the employer to prove that they did not violate the minimum wages order. So employers should and are encouraged to keep records of wages and salary payments. Because if the employee makes an allegation, comes to the Ministry of Labor and Complaints and makes an allegation that they were paid less than the minimum wages, and you are called to answer, as an employer, the burden is on you to prove that you did in fact comply with the minimum wages order. So let me go over that again, because I think it's important, Sherry Ann. If you pay less than the minimum wage prescribed, if you do it a first time, you are liable on conviction to a fine of $5,000. You do it a second time or more, you are liable on conviction to a fine of $10,000 for each time you commit the offense. If the court finds that you did in fact violate the minimum wages order, you will be liable to pay the employee the difference that you withheld together with interest. And if you've paid less than the wages prescribed by the minimum wages order and a complaint is lodged, the burden would be on you as the employer to prove that you did not breach the minimum wages order. I hope that helps.
And finally, from me for now, so how will the reporting process be done in order to protect the employee who is making that particular report to you? So to avoid any victimization and so on the job that I have reported that we are not being paying the minimum wage.
Well, the Employment Act makes provision for that. The Employment Act provides that where an employee is exercising any right conferred by the Employment Act, it will be unlawful and an offense for the employer to victimize the employee based on his or her exercise of the right conferred by the Act. And that applies to all rights given by the Employment Act, because the Act covers a whole range of matters relating to workers and conditions of employment. Yeah.
Thank you, Senator. Rena, you may go ahead.
Rena Bae Thomas, GDN. My question would go to the Minister for Finance, Mr. Cornwall. Could you tell us when was the last time public servants received a bonus? And what are some of the areas you see in need for improvement in the public sector? I know you spoke about, having a bit of concern with public servants and the way they go about their productivity. Can you tell us some of the areas you see that need for improvement?
Okay. Well, I would have to juggle my memory to think of one or two of the occasions where some public servants may have received some more compensation for
2021
work done. I think I can refer to what was paid in 2021, just around the time when COVID pandemic was in full force, and that the authorities then thought it was useful to compensate people who are on the front line trying to save lives in Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique, and that was a good move, I thought. I can recall also that there were gratuity, ex gratia payment, or bonus to civil servants at the end of the year. Again, it's not a floodgate where every year there's expectation that you should give your workers ex gratia or bonus payment. I know it happens in the statutory bodies and commissions and state-owned enterprises, as well as some private sector companies within the country would have done that based on the results of their activities during the year. Now, while that expectation, we are being encouraged by our employees that we have to look at what is happening in the wider sector of the country, and that may have some merit. But again, government has to manage the resources that they collect, and therefore, I would not say that it's something that government would want to continue doing without a proper performance in place to ensure that there is increased productivity, people are doing what they're supposed to do. Some of the issues I mentioned earlier that the public expect from public servants, that you go to, let's say, a department for some service and you expect to receive quality service. But there are a lot of complaints out there. People come to us and say, well, look, workers come late in the morning. By the time they settle down, 10 o'clock, they start thinking of, boy, 2 o'clock, I'm live in the building and go. We have had cases of where people abandon their posts and not being able to be there to provide the service. So we have to basically improve and up our game on all of this. And we don't want to do it by, let's say, using the big stick. The big stick is where you go along micromanaging, bullying people to get things done. We want people to be conscious of the fact that you are doing a service, we want value for money, and you need to be conscious of the fact that you have to provide quality service to your customers.
Thank you. Do you have another question?
There was, I'll give my thoughts.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning to the table. Troy Gill of MTV News. My first question is for Senator Joseph. For clarification, can you share with us, is the minimum wage also going to be applied to seasonal businesses and enterprises as well?
Yes.
And my next question is for Mr. Cornwall. And it's similar to Sherry's question. What are the penalties of disciplinary actions that are often taken with regards to ensuring that people are compliant with regards to? Okay, so just to repeat my questions, I do apologize. Right, so I believe Ms. Joseph would have, just for the audience, the listening audience, right? So my first question for Ms. Joseph, can you share with us, is the minimum wage also going to be applied to seasonal businesses and enterprises? For example, those that happens just once or twice per year, right? And my second question is for Minister Cornwall. Can you share with us what are the penalties or disciplinary actions that are or ought to be taken when people are not compliant with regards to work ethic and so forth? Thank you.
I will answer the question in the following way. Established workers in the public service are appointed by the Public Service Commission, who has all rights to reward and to basically discipline workers that fall in that category. The same applies to unestablished, temporary, imanis, and all other forms of workers that we have in the system. Now, one may say, well, what basis are you going to use to punish a worker if he falls out of line? And I'm saying that we ought all have to be conscious of the fact that we are hired to provide a service to the public. So your first and foremost objective is to make sure you do that in an amicable, disciplined, and well thought out process. You don't want to go to an office in the morning to pay the tax, and the person who's supposed to be receiving the monies and so on is not even in the seat and so on. They are chatting with some friend around the corner. These might be minor breaches and so on, but there could be in the system breaches that could be considered to cause the employer to basically dismiss, fire, get rid of that worker. That again is managed by the Public Service Commission as well as the departments. What I found in Grenada as a problem is that sometimes heads of department, supervision of personnel do not take steps to ensure that the workers are aware of some of these things and what could happen when they breach. You have situations where people commit offenses and it's not documented. The workers may or may not be told that you have breached the service. And again, when it comes to firing somebody in the public service, it has become a very difficult thing, especially those established public workers. They are protected to a large extent. However, it's not foolproof. You could be disciplined, called by the Public Service Commission, and be asked to account for your stewardship during the day at work. So the persons who maybe get away with coming to work late and living when they want and not being productive, these things can be addressed through the Public Service Commission or through the heads of department. And I believe we hire heads of department and managers and so on in the service to do a job. And turning a blind eye to those cases I referred to and so on is not the best thing. So we're thinking about not only the employees that have to report to a supervisor, everyone should be conscious of the fact that they need to be more productive and up the game and be professional in what you're doing in the public service.
Thank you, Troy. Do you have another question? I do see a hand on Zoom, but you can go ahead if you have.
Yes, this would be my final question for Minister Cornwall again. Could we see possibly the implementation of a complaints committee or complaints desk for people who wish to file complaints or have any issues?
Well, I think within the system thus far, even within the Public Service Commission, there are mechanisms for filing problem-related cases and so on. In other words, if a department has somebody that is traditionally troublemaker or somebody who does not comply with the rules of the service, they can be taken to task at the Public Service Commission. And again, the Public Service Commission should have in place a committee that deals with complaints and deals with issues like that. I have seen cases where, for example, that people were recommended to be medically boarded because they always come to work with a complaint that they are sick and they're this and they're that and the other and so on. You wouldn't want that person to be fired like that. You might basically direct that person to basically get medical tests or reports and present it to prove that you are well and able to work. So it's just not a case where you just fire somebody like that. There are procedures which I use to determine whether or not that person is, well, foxing the system. Okay?
If I may add, Madam Press Secretary, apart from the people who are employed or appointed by the Public Service Commission, now the Public Service Commission may appoint someone definitively in the service, or as we say, like on the establishment, a permanent worker. The Public Service Commission may appoint someone on contract, and they may also do may appoint people on temporary arrangements. There are quite a number of persons, however, who are appointed in the service, but I should not say appointed, employed in the service on contracts, different forms of contracts. And in almost all cases, those contracts are routed through the Department of Public Administration. And in those contracts, for the most part, they say matters, there's a term in a contract, and a contract is a free negotiated arrangement between two parties. So the term in that contract would normally say that matters relating to discipline will be dealt with applying the Public Service Commission rules. So the Commission itself may not treat with the matter in relation to discipline, or will not treat with the matter if it did not appoint the person. But in treating with a matter in relation to discipline, the relevant department or ministry will be guided by the disciplinary rules of the Public Service Commission. That's a standard feature of most of the contracts. Now, in relation to people in relation to everyone, and I see it happening in the Ministry of Labor sometimes. It has happened a couple of times where, especially those offices like Labor, Finance, Supreme Court Registry, those offices where there's a lot of interfacing with the public, a lot of interaction with the public, you would find sometimes unpleasantness may arise in terms of how a public officer may interact with a member of the public. In some instances, it's a member of the public who are at fault in terms of how they treat with the public officer. But letters are usually written. Letters of complaints are usually written to the head of department, addressed to the permanent secretary or the head of department, and that individual will treat with it internally. If it's a PSC appointed person and an allegation is serious enough to warrant the attention of the Public Service Commission, that is done, or that could be done. If not, the permanent secretary, assisted by the next in line, the senior administrative officer, they are the HR persons in the ministry who will deal with these matters. So there is a system. There's a system in place, and I've seen it work.
Thank you, Senator. Question? Another question?
Good morning to the head table. So my question is for Senator Joseph. So it has been announced that caregivers are going to receive 100% increase. Why was that decision taken upon? And would caregivers be the only one to receive 100% increase?
So the decision encompasses all of the recommendations that are being made by the Wages Advisory Committee, and that will be passed into law with effect from 1st January. Now, in the consultations that took place, owners of these facilities and owners and operators of these facilities were consulted. They were met with, and the recommendation of the committee came out of those discussions in part, right? Apart from examining the scientific data in terms of what would be a reasonable remuneration for persons in that sector. And as with the rest of the order, that new rate will come into effect from January. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. We have a question from Linda Straker. She's online joining us this morning. Linda, you may go ahead with your question.
Good morning to you, the entire team at this news conference. I have a number of questions for both ministers. My first question is to Minister Cornwall. Can he tell us how much that ex gratia will cost the government? How much workers are standing to benefit from it? And under which budget is this allocation? Is it under the 2023 budget or the 2024 budget, future supplementary budget?
Well, to answer your question, these payments will be made in 2023, so it has nothing to do with the 2024 budget. In terms of who the payments will affect, it would be applied to all persons paid on the payroll currently, except government ministers and pensioners would not receive any such ex gratia payments. In terms of how much it would cost the government at this point in time, it's going to be to the tune of $6.9 million thereabout. Because currently our payroll is just over $30 million per month. And if we are paying 25% of that, it would fall around $6-7 million.
Thank you, Linda. Did Minister answer your question, or do you have a follow-up question?
I was mainly looking at, he did say earlier that public officers are going to get it. I was looking at numbers. Is it 5,000, 6,000 officers are going to receive that?
Well, I do not have a fix on the number of persons that fall in each category. Because we know that we have established workers, we have unestablished workers, we have people on contract for service, and the numbers could be anyway at this point in time. So I do not want to commit to give you a direct figure because I do not have that at the fingertip nor at my disposal at this point in time. But that answer can be provided to you by the person who would be processing the payment, and at a subsequent time, that figure might be able to be given to you. But as we speak, it covers all persons that are paid from the government purse at this point in time, except the retirees or pensioners, and it doesn't include the ministers of government.
And if I might add here, Minister, it also includes the Imani trainees as well.
Right.
My second question to the minister is, when you delivered the budget on Monday, you said an independent committee will be appointed to develop a framework of compensation, salary, fringe benefit, etc., for cabinet ministers and senior managers. And you further went on to say that where salaries of cabinet ministers and permanent secretaries are tied to the outcome of union negotiation is not a good practice. Can you tell us why it is not a good practice, in your opinion?
Well, I think there is an imminent conflict of interest in that process, because remember, salary negotiation takes place between the government representatives and the unions, right? I mean, there might be a back and forth for months in some cases, although we've tried in this time to minimize the problems that we've had or seen in the past, whereby people have had to take the street to basically defend what they are actually asking for and those things. So we believe, for example, if a permanent secretary or a senior officer in the ministries is part of the negotiating team, that is basically mandated to ensure that the negotiation stays within a particular parameter. You cannot turn around at the end of the day and say, well, if I give the public service and the teachers and the nurses and so on a particular increase, that this increase should be applied to the parliamentarians and heads of department. I think that is wrong. There's an inherent conflict of interest in that. So what we are proposing is that an independent commission or committee be appointed at some point in time to review salaries of ministers of government and senior public officers with regard to increments as we go forward. So that's what we are proposing, not to use the system whereby if the public servants get X amount, the ministers get an increase of X amount. That is something that we would not want to continue doing. It has happened in the past, but it's wrong.
Thank you, Minister. Linda, do you have a follow-up question? If you do, you may proceed.
Yes, I just needed some clarity with that. The last union negotiations where I think 4% was included for the year 2023. Did cabinet ministers also get that increase?
No. But I know of instances in the past where government ministers and senior public servants would have benefited from the increases that the unions negotiated for the workers. We are saying that's not the way to go. This is something that I think is absolutely wrong, and we should have an independent, separate committee negotiating salary increases for public servants and ministers.
My other question is to Minister Joseph. One person is trying to ask me to really ask that. Contract workers and part-time workers in particular, would the minimum wage also apply to them?
Contract workers and
part-time workers.
Well, in the case of a contract worker, if you sign a contract with an employer, there's freedom to bargain. But that said, an employer should not enter into a contractual arrangement with a worker covered by the categories in the minimum wages order, because remember, it's only the categories covered in the order. Outside of that, parties are free to contract on the terms mutually agreeable to both sides. But employers should not enter into contractual arrangement that will drop the employee below the minimum wages order. And when we speak of, when you say part-time, remember in most instances, the rate is per hour. So once you perform the job, you should be paid the hourly or the weekly or the daily rate as prescribed in the minimum wages order.
What happens if that profession is not listed in the minimum wage order?
Then the minimum wages, well, it would not apply because the order is specific, right? The order is specific to the categories listed. Remember, in the minimum wages order would generally deal with those workers who are most vulnerable, so to speak. They may not be unionized. Their bargaining power may be limited. And so that is why the order, the Employment Act, protects these categories of workers. Outside of that, you generally have the other categories of workers either unionized or in a position, a stronger bargaining position than those covered by the minimum wages order. So we would typically not have issues for those categories that you do not see in the order, which is why we try to bring in some vulnerable categories in this new minimum wages order: sanitation workers, early childhood workers, media workers, and call center workers.
Was there any category that the committee recommend be removed from the minimum wage order? I know you have listed those that have the new ones included, but were there any category that was removed?
You mean a category that was already there and removed?
Yes.
No. All of the categories that were previously in the that you would find in the existing order, you will see them repeated in this one, with some of them expanded. So, for example, construction. In the previous order, there was no laborer, there was no helper, there was no minimum wages stipulated for them. They are now included, and in addition to which, all of the other categories that were already there are repeated. So you have new and expanded categories, none deleted.
Thank you. My final question
Go ahead.
Go ahead. The chief legal advisor to the cabinet, that's you, the Attorney General.
Yes.
Can you, when your office or you became aware of the Samoa Agreement, and what was your recommendation to the cabinet in terms of signing and going forward?
So government is a continuum. And my information is that my predecessors advised the government on this since between 2019 and 2021. My information is that the government of Grenada negotiated this agreement since 2019 and agreed to the terms of the agreement and initialed the agreement since 2021. So it is not a matter that needed to come before me, as government had already, despite all of what you hear, government had already agreed to this treaty. That's point one. Point two, there is nothing in the treaty, as far as I could see, that is inimical to the interests of our people, or that potentially harms our country, our moral fabric, and the way we view things. There's no threat there as far as I could see. The agreement was signed on to by all of the CARICOM countries, as far as I am aware. The other thing is, when you sign on to an agreement, an international agreement, a treaty, a convention, it's a two-stage process. So first you sign, but it only has the force and effect of law domestically when ratification takes place and it is tabled in the parliament. So what has happened is the first stage. And in the process of ratifying a treaty or convention, a country may do so with reservations. That's standard. So that you peruse the agreement and you indicate which clauses will not apply to your country, whether it be it for economic, religious, or other reasons. And then finally, in the Samoa Agreement, there is a clause that allows a country to give 6 months' notice of its intention to opt out of the agreement, and that's all it takes for the country to opt out. So, quite frankly, I think all of the noises in relation to this Samoa Agreement are really uncalled for. And as Shakespeare would put it, much ado about nothing.
Thank you so much, Linda, and thank you, Senator Claudette Joseph, for that explanation. I believe we have one final question from a media worker from GBN, Rena, and then we will summarize our press conference for today. Go ahead.
It's not one question, but has started Senator Claudette. I know you spoke about the new minimum wage being published, but could you just clarify if it has to pass through Parliament before or after the publication in the Gazette, before it's implemented in January?
No, it doesn't. And the reason for this is that laws come in two species in our system of government. So you have primary legislation, which would be the Principal Act, and those will be required to go through Parliament. And then you have secondary or subsidiary legislation, which are your SRNOs, which generally there are few exceptions, those relating to taxes and so. Those SRNOs will sometimes be required to be tabled in the Parliament. But the vast majority of SRNOs, those are the subsidiary or secondary legislation, those are regulations that support the Principal Act. So the minimum wages order, the requirement or the provisions for minimum wage, they are contained in sections 52 to 54 of the Employment Act. And that empowers the minister to make regulations treating with minimum wage. And the order is really the regulation that the minister is empowered to make and publish. And those subsidiary legislations are usually SRNO statutory instrument, and they are not required to be tabled in the Parliament to come into force. All that is required is for them to be signed by the relevant minister, in this case, the Minister for Labour, and published in the Gazette, and they come into force on the date indicated in the Gazette.
I know that the Minimum Wage Committee was asked to do the final round of consultation. Yeah. Was there any changes made within that final round, just to be sure? And Minister for Finance, has government already constructed the framework within the public service for the appraisal that may lead to the payment of bonuses going forward? And would that appraisal be quarterly, monthly, yearly?
Should I go first?
You can go. Well, I know you start. You start talking. Go ahead.
Okay, so our intention is to put in place by the end of 2024 a performance appraisal system that allows government to be able to determine whether or not they have a case to be able to at least offer our public servants ex gratia payment or bonus of any kind. Now, what should ideally happen during the year is that employees should be assessed continuously. I mean, I know some systems they've done it on a quarterly basis, a yearly basis, or annual basis. Now, that is happening outside of this idea of having to pay public servants a bonus at the end of the year. Because again, in the public service, you have things like increments that will be paid. You have things like promotions that have to be made and so on. And therefore, if you don't have a performance system in place to determine whether or not the person is performing or not, it will not help the system. But again, I would feel comfortable to know that at the end of the year, I can basically go back to targets set at the beginning of the year and to ensure that employees have met those targets, done well, the productivity level can be seen, you will have less complaints in the system, and of course, at the end of the day, you'll have a much more efficient running public service. And that is where I think the idea of implementing a performance appraisal system to do just that is what is required in the service. That will take care of all the other problems that we have in, like delinquent employees coming to work late and leaving early, people not doing what they should do, people are not having a good attitude towards the public that they serve. All of these things will be addressed.
Thank you, Rena.
Yes, thank you. I think she asked me a question.
Go ahead.
Yes. So during the second round of consultation, there were some adjustments made to the initial recommendations. The first one would be the inclusion of sanitary workers. They were not included in the first. I say sanitation. Sorry. Sanitation workers. They were not included in the first set of recommendations. And as I said, the recommended minimum wage for them would be $108 a day. Then there were call center workers, where initially there was a recommendation for a phased introduction for them at $1,200 a month in 2024, and then it went up to $14 a month in 2025. After further consultations and research, the revised recommendation came in at $8.50 across the board, implemented at as of January 1st, 2024. And there was also a slight adjustment with, I think it was the early childhood workers. They are now going to be a phased approach at $1,200 in the first instance in 2024, and then it will increase to $1,400 effective January 1st, 2025. So those were the three main changes that we saw after the second round of consultations. So one sector got in. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. If there aren't any more questions, I now invite members of the panel, if you have any final comments you wish to make, you may do so at this time.
Right. So,
Good.
Since I've already started speaking, I know we are in the Yuletide season. I must also say I'm not Santa Claus. And those benefits that we offered our public servants was not based on the government of the day is playing Santa Claus. But I think deserving public servants who have worked hard and enjoyed the hardship that they would have had to enjoy during the year. I mean, I've seen most of the buildings in which public servants operating are not at their optimum level. I mean, the conditions were not working, heat all day, holes, structural cracks in building and so on. And we have to address those things soonest, because without that, we'll have the productivity issue being affected. Another thing that we have had to basically take on board, which is not a nice thing also, we have had to move out of our current positions or locations to rent other facilities to be able to survive at this point in time, while we try to rehabilitate those buildings that are affected. And to me, that is something that government has to take responsibility for and have it at the foremost point to ensure that all government buildings are maintained on an ongoing basis. Don't wait until the thing falling apart before you have to go and spend millions of dollars to have it done and create conditions that would be not conducive to productivity. So I want to wish each and every one of you in the public service, out there in the general public, in the diaspora, a Merry Christmas, because I don't know if I will have the chance to basically interface with you in a setting like this. So I want to take the opportunity to do that now. So Merry Christmas, everybody, and be safe.
Thank you, Minister. Ms. Siobhan, you wanted to make some comments to close.
Thank you, Presec. As a public officer who will benefit from this gracious payment, so on behalf of all public officers, I would like to extend gratitude to Honorable Minister Cornwall, Minister of Finance, and also the Cabinet of Ministers for approving this token for public officers. I think that it will go a long way into boosting our morale. And also, I want to applaud the initiative to implement the performance appraisal system, because even though we do have functioning somewhat performance appraisal system, is not usually tied to any sort of payment of bonus or anything like that. And I think that's usually one of the reasons why public officers are not really keen on having the performance appraisal done anyway, because they're not seeing the benefit of it. So we look forward to having a properly functioning one that we can say at the end of the year, I worked hard and I'm able to see something. And even though a lot of us, we do hear the complaints about public officers not working hard and so on, but there are a lot of public officers that do work hard. And they work hard not because because there is some kind of monetary bonus or something tied to it, but because intrinsically they have a desire to do their best. And I do think that this would be a good incentive for them to continue doing that. And the monetary compensation is always good. And hopefully when it's implemented, we will get the payment before the Christmas season next time. So at least the government could get back some money in VAT and so on. But thank you, Minister and Cabinet Ministers, and also Merry Christmas to everyone.
Thank you, Siobhan. Wonderful summary there. Senator, would you like to close with some comments?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Etienne. I would just like to say that by now it will be obvious to all workers in Grenada, to public officers, to workers in the private sector, to our workers in the most vulnerable sectors. It will be obvious to all of you that we are truly looking after the interests of the working people of this country, as we do so together and in full cooperation with employers. Because we believe when you have happy and contented workers, when you have satisfied employers, you have greater productivity, and workers and employers alike get greater reward. The more profit an employer makes, the more bonus and benefits he or she or it can confer on its workers. I think we have clearly shown in the last 18 months where our hearts are, pun intended, that we really have the best interests of our country at heart. We want to see our country prosper, move up higher to greater and better things. That is why between the payment of retroactive pension and gratuity and the CES grant, we pumped over $100 million cash into the hands of the ordinary Grenadian people. Cash between payment of these two matters. Then we went ahead and paid the salaries that were docked from public officers again. And that despite the ruling of the court. We did this in good faith because we thought it was the right and proper thing to do by our workers. We went ahead and we made payment of retroactive salaries to our TAMCC lecturers, and then we provided free tuition to all TAMCC and NULO students. We keep repeatedly demonstrating our commitment to the people of the country and our genuine desire to see our country become wealthy and prosperous. So we ask for the continued support and cooperation. It was at great pains and effort that we were able to successfully negotiate without too much rancor and protest and so with all of the public sector unions, your salary and fringe benefits for the 3 ensuing years. So we're looking forward to a stable, healthy, contented, productive industrial relations climate in 2024. As we celebrate 50, we want to turn a new page in terms of attitudes, in terms of how we treat with each other, in terms of how we interact with each other. We have been trying our best to stay true to the people of Grenada, to do what we say we're going to do and to live by our word, so that people, we must turn this page where the public, the nation, could begin to believe politicians when politicians speak. When politicians say they're going to do something, we want to turn that page where you move from the point where you don't believe anything politicians say to where you believe what we say, because we are demonstrating we are doing what we say we're going to do, and where you hold politicians and persons in authority to account and you hold them to the word, right? So we look forward to a prosperous 2024, to a great 50th anniversary celebrations, to the emergence of a proud nation and proud people again. And finally, may I say a very Merry Christmas to everyone, especially those of you in the media who I may not be able to sit in a room in this setting again for the rest of the year. So Merry Christmas to all of you, and enjoy your new minimum wage. I think you feel a little more secure now that you have your minimum, you're protected by the minimum wages order. So Merry Christmas to all of you, including those of you who are viewing and listening online. But you'll hear a little bit of us again because we still have the budget debate coming up.
Yes.
Yes.
We wanted to stay tuned and be engaged.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. What a very informative press conference this morning. And just to recap, the new minimum wage order will take effect January 1st, 2024 across all sectors. And I want to highlight some of those: media workers, industrial workers, machine operators, mechanics, cleaners, domestic workers, clerical workers, and caregivers and security officers, and of course, sanitation workers. And we've added call center workers. And just a reminder, as mentioned in the budget presentation, the wages have been equalized across parishes and gender. And to find out more about the laws and the minimum wage order, you can visit laws.gov.gd, and these will also be published in the Government Gazette. We also highlighted that all government workers, including permanent, unestablished, temporary, contract off service, and contract for service, IMANIs, will all receive a token of 25% added to their salary, and this will be reflected in the last salary payment in December. And we have at this time come to the end of today's press conference. Thank you all once again for joining us for this informative press conference. I believe the panel did due diligence in answering questions posed by the members of the media. I want to say thank you to the viewers and listeners online, and I want to shout out the comment section. I think you guys had a lively discourse this morning, and we appreciate all your comments. So from all of us here at the Government Information Service, the Ministry of Finance, and of course the Prime Minister's Ministry, enjoy the Yuletide season and have a productive 2024. Have a good day. It's a wrap, everybody. Yep.